All right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to heat the oven to 350 degrees. Then we are going to brush this butternut squash with olive oil, and we're going to season it. Now I have cut off the end of it where the root was, and I've cut it in half, and I've taken out the seeds. That's all you need to do to it. Then we're going to put some olive oil on it down into the well there too, okay? And sprinkle it with some salt and some freshly ground black pepper, and then we're going to brush it, spread that around, okay? Want to get the well nice and coated on the inside, and the top surface, the cut surface, want to get that nice and coated, and spread that salt and pepper around pretty well, okay? All right, then we're going to put it face down on the pan. Now, I'm using a Silpat mat. You don't have to do that. If you put it in a pan, you might just want to grease the pan a little bit first. All right, then we're going to do the same thing with the apple pieces. Now, the apples have been used 3 or 4 apples depending upon the size of your butternut squash. This is kind of a medium one, so use 3 apples. And I've peeled them, cut out the cores, cut them into pieces. We're going to do the same thing with them. We're going to sprinkle them with some olive oil, and then salt, kosher salt, and freshly ground black pepper. All right, then we're going to toss them. Then we're going to put them face down on the same pan, and I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil in the Silpat just so I get a nice coating there, and I'm going to move the apple pieces around in the olive oil so that they're coated on the bottom. Okay, then we're going to put this into the 350-degree oven until they are done. When are they done? Butternut squash will be done when you can pierce it easily with a toothpick or a fork in all of its areas. Now, it's going to pierce more easily where the well is, where the seeds were, than in the thick part. So you might, if you get it to be easy to pierce in the well area, you're still going to have to cook it longer, so it's easy to pierce in the thick part. And then the same thing with the apples, but they are going to be soft sooner. So they're probably going to take, apple's probably going to take 20 minutes to a half an hour. Butternut squash is probably going to take 45 minutes to an hour. So we're going to put this into the 350-degree oven. All right, so our squash and our apples have been in there for about 40 minutes, and the apples are nice and soft, and the butternut squash, though, is not yet soft enough. So we're going to take the apples off and put them in a bowl and hold them aside, and then put the butternut squash back into the oven for, we'll try another 20 minutes, see how they do. Okay, here's our butternut squash. It's been in the oven probably about an hour at 350 degrees, and it's nice and soft. You can easily pierce it with a fork. Right, now we're going to set this aside and let this cool enough so that we can remove the squash from the shell of the squash. All right, now we're going to chop the apples coarsely. And then back into the bowl until we're ready to use them. There we go. Okay, now we're just going to hold these aside until we're ready to use them. All right, now we're going to remove the squash from the shell of the squash just by using a spoon and scraping it out. And if your squash is well enough done, it will be soft enough that it will be pretty easy to scrape out. Now, once you get down around the shell, the skin of the squash, it might be kind of hard to separate some of that. But I'm going to do my best and keep the shell and the skin out of the amount that I'm scraping out of here. And then I'm just going to put what I scrape out into the same bowl with the apples, because it's all going to go into the soup. Okay, now that was half of the squash, and we have about half squash here and about half apple, and I'm making enough for 8 people, and I think this is enough, so I'm just going to use half of the squash. But you know, if you use a really small squash, you probably use the whole thing. This was kind of
now we're going to make the soup.
I'm going
First, we're going to sweat the mirepoix,
for something else.
starting with the onions, carrots, and celery. And we're going to add some olive oil to that, so we get a nice coating on everything. It's probably 2-3 tablespoons. And then we're going to put that on medium heat and stir it up so all the mirepoix is coated with the olive oil. Now, some cooks will say you should season your mirepoix. Because I have so much of it, I am going to season it a bit. But if I have a small amount of it, I sometimes don't season it. But you want to season it lightly, right? You can always add more salt and pepper. It's hard to take it away, right? So start out light. We'll adjust it later. Now we're going to let that sweat until basically we stop seeing the steam coming off of it and the vegetables become translucent. Okay, our mirepoix is sweating nicely. The vegetables are getting translucent. I want to add the garlic. Now garlic burns fast and easy, okay? So we want to stir it up occasionally. I don't want to just keep continuously stir it because it won't get enough contact with the pan to sweat. But we basically want to sweat this like we were sweating the rest of the vegetables. And we're going to do that for, I don't know, we have a lot of mirepoix here, so I think maybe 60 seconds or 1 to 2 minutes. Okay, it looks like our garlic is sweated nicely. It's kind of translucent. The rest of the mirepoix is sweated a little bit more. Now what we're going to do is add the butternut squash and apples to that. I'm going to add some chicken stock. We wanted the chicken stock to kind of just cover the vegetables. We can always add more later to thin it, but it's harder to thin if you get it it's harder to thicken it if you get it too thin. So we're adding just enough to cover the vegetables, and then we're going to add some Calvados. How much? Oh, about 1/4 cup. And then we're going to bring that to a boil. And then when it starts to boil, we're going to reduce the heat and let it simmer for a little while. And while it is coming to a boil, we're going to add some seasoning, kosher salt, and some freshly ground black pepper. Now remember, we seasoned the mirepoix, okay? So what we're adding now is enough seasoning for the apples and the squash that we added. But remember, start light. You can always add more later. So we're going to bring that to a boil and then let it simmer. All right, so we're starting to come to a boil here. We're going to reduce the heat and let it simmer for about 10 minutes. Okay, now we want to puree the soup mixture. I have it in the blender. Putting the lid on the blender and turning it on.
Okay, now we're going to take it off of the blender and strain it. All right, now I'm going to pour the soup mixture into this strainer, which is kind of a combination strainer and food mill. If you don't have one like this, you can just press it through the strainer with a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon. But this is great. It has this little wheel in there and a blade, and it just presses it through very quickly. If I can find a source for it, I will put it in the source information, but I got this in Europe years ago. I want to take a clean spatula and get the soup mixture off of the back of your strainer so you don't waste any. All right, now we're going to check our consistency, and this is it's a perfect consistency for the soup that I'm going for. I don't want it to be too runny, and I don't want it to be too thick. Now, you can always thin it though if you need to with water or with more chicken stock. And then we're going to taste it. I think it needs a little bit more salt. Let's taste it again. Perfect. The salt taste is just barely starting to come through. If you watch my video on mastering salt, I talk a lot about this. All right, so now we're going to keep this warm until we are ready to serve. All right, now we're going to plate up the soup. So we're going to take a ladle full of the roasted butternut squash and apple soup, lay it out into a wide bowl, all right? And then we want to ladle about a half of a smaller ladle of the Aji Amarillo soup into the center. So you have two very similar colors. Good. And then we're just going to garnish it with a few pieces of very thinly sliced cherry tomato. And there we have it. This is a soup within a soup. This is the roasted butternut squash and apple soup with Calvados on the outside. And then on the inside is the roasted yellow pepper and Aji Amarillo cream soup. You can see photos of the final dish at my Instagram, which is at Chef's Apprentice, Cook Like a Pro. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.